City, one component of that clearly was around informal settlements and informal settlement upgrading. So informal settlements as an entry point into the city, but informal settlements also as in some respects a manifestation of being denied access to the city and what the city has to offer in its entirety. So this led to sort of a continuation of sorts, a morphing of this interest into a program on informal settlement upgrading. And at the same time, while we were exploring these issues and we came to this conclusion, there was a clear interest at national level around informal settlement upgrading. So there was Outcome 8, there was the targets that were formulated, the NASP was given more shape and form. So there was a sense that informal settlement upgrading is on the national policy agenda, there's an institutional interest, and as an NGO we were quite interested to find out where our sector, the NGO sector, fits into that space. What is the historical learning that our sector can bring to bear in terms of advancing a progressive agenda? What is the current practice? What are the challenges? And so forth. So when we started our informal settlements upgrading program, we were initially starting a conversation primarily with peer organizations in the sector, to get a sense of where they're at, to get a sense of their interest and appetite, to get a sense of their capabilities, to really drive a large and progressive and upscaled agenda, and to support that process. And it was quite a sobering exercise, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. But it was quite sobering. One of the things that we thought when we designed our 2-year program at the time, I think we were fairly romantic and optimistic. In the first year we thought we'll have these robust engagements with the NGO sector, talking about the practice, talking about the opportunity, positioning ourselves, and forward we go. In year 2, we will get these same organizations to document their practice and their case studies, so that we can influence a progressive practice. So year 2 was robust, engaged, was very interesting and inspiring. Year 2 came along, we were ready to put out our call for abstracts and and we were testing the waters with the NGO partners. And clearly, this sort of jump from strategizing and thinking to implementation is not as quick as we had initially hoped. And of course, we were a little bit starry-eyed around that. So we really needed to change tack at the time. And one of the things that gave us some comfort was that we realized that there is a lot of under-documented and undocumented practice out there. But it's not necessarily or exclusively in the NGO sector. So we started to cast the net a bit wider and look at the other sectors in government, in the private sector, in the non-profit sector, in academia, to look at what are some of the lessons that are coming through, the practices we can document, the ideas and the research that has been generated. So this led us to a realization that we couldn't do it alone. So we embarked on a partnership, and in fact we didn't have to look very long and hard. We quite immediately and intuitively recognized that the African Center for Cities was the obvious partner for us to work with, particularly with Liza and Warren's work in human settlements and in informal settlement upgrading. So we knocked on their door and we said, we think we've got a joint interest here, we'd like to work with you on this project, what do you think? And I don't think they really had to think about it long and hard. We got a positive response quite immediately from them. So we then sent out a call for abstracts, and quite frankly we were quite overwhelmed with the responses. In our initial imagination we had a book in mind that would have about hopefully 10 chapters. We're currently at 25. I think we had at some point more abstracts. It looked like we were getting closer to 30, but as these processes go, some of these contributions sometimes fall by the wayside. And what was really important for us, and I know it was also important for ACC, was to make sure that we would get contributions of people from very different backgrounds, very different institutional contexts, different experiences, But with that also comes a recognition that people write in different registers, with different voices, with different even stylistic sort of reference points and so forth. So obviously it was a very interesting process. Liza will talk a little bit more about that, including how we created or tried to create a sense of a community of practice around this. Needless to say, it was a long time in the making, and I know that some of you, particularly the authors who have contributed to this, and some of you who have been alerted to this, that it was coming, have been wondering whether we would really live to see this day. And that's just partly in the nature of these kind of processes. When you have so many contributors, so many editors, there were 5 editors, which is a blessing, and on the other hand, it creates its own dynamics, which I may share with you after a few glasses of wine. But so we and then of course we had the editorial process, the text editor, the peer reviewers, and all of that. So here we are. I guess it's about 3 years later. Nonetheless, although we recognize that the book itself there are some elements where the information presented may be dated, where it may not be the latest statistics on the number of informal settlements or the makeup of informal settlements or the policies and the impact of some of those policies and instruments. We do think that what we're offering is still a critical resource to those who want to understand the practices and challenges regarding informal settlement upgrading, including the role of communities, the possibilities of partnerships, the challenges and opportunities that different instruments offer, and those kinds of issues. Now, we're not suggesting in any way that we're offering a singular perspective on the state of affairs or on the solutions or the way forward. This is a collated volume, so it's got multiple voices, multiple views, multiple perspectives. And it's most definitely not the conclusive guide to or review of informal settlement upgrading. But we do think that at this time of policy uncertainty and what we referred to earlier today as an institutional turn of sorts, we believe that it will be a valuable resource and a reference point for those who feel that the status quo of exclusion, of indignity, of secondary citizenship needs to change. I hand over to Liza.
Center for Cities. And Isandla recognizes that knowledge is power, and the way in which you produce knowledge has implications for the politics and the power dynamics within which it is created. So this book sought to blur some of those boundaries. It sought to look at many different ways of producing knowledge and seeing if we can actually weave them together. We have practitioners, we have officials, we have policymakers, we have academics, we have pseudo-academics, we have a whole range of people who have decided to write for this book. And when we got these different contributions in, we tried really hard to create a balance between the different voices that would come through. But more so than just the balance and the actual sets of contributions, we did something very unconventional for, say, a typical academic book. So in a typical academic book, for those who haven't been a part of one, you submit your submission, you say what you want to say, they decide if it fits with the book, and then it either goes in or it goes out of the book. This is very different in the sense that people submitted abstracts, and on the basis of those abstracts, we all sat down and we had long conversations about what each contribution could do for the book as a whole. So it was quite literally a co-produced process of what each and every chapter was going to do. Now, obviously, people had their own ideas about what they wanted their chapters to mean and how they wanted them to contribute, but this was greatly influenced by a series of multiple-day workshops with all of the other participants and even people who ended up not participating in the end. Am I moving around? Fine. So this was very different from that perspective. I think in some ways it was quite challenging for a conventional academic. For a conventional academic, usually you write your chapter and at the end you say, it's actually very complex and we need more research. And this is something we would not accept in this process. When academics are in the room with officials, with policymakers, with activists, they needed more. They needed to understand what does this knowledge add up to, and how can it help us? And so it turns out the process, the sort of step from knowledge creation to applicability and relevance is not sort of an easy and linear process. It does require conversations, muddling, messiness, and this was definitely part of the process. So it wasn't the easiest process, I think, for some of the academics involved, but neither for the activists and policymakers. The process of trying to connect to bodies of literature, in some cases it's unclear if you want to connect to the right to the city literature, or perhaps an upgrading literature, or maybe a literature around local level politics. Picking that body of literature, fleshing it out, and so much has been written in South Africa and internationally, was definitely hard. I think for a lot of people it was also really difficult to understand how long and cumbersome a peer review process is, and I hope you can have a little bit more respect for the academic drudgery that we all go through. Multiple rounds of edits from the editors themselves, from other people in the collective, from the 2 rounds of peer reviewers, and then from the final stage editors was definitely something that I think a lot of people struggled with. So I really want to give a hand to all of the authors coming from any register of knowledge who came through this process and challenged themselves to be part of this sort of, I would say, kind of blurry and messy knowledge production process, but really coming out with a product that I think very much speaks to what we believe in, which is ultimately that to conquer complex issues, we need complex knowledge production processes. And I think this book very much speaks to that. I'm almost done. Almost done. All right. So finally, I think one of the things that I'd like to point out specifically, which you will definitely see in the conclusion and the introductions to the book, is that this book sought to take very seriously the tools, instruments, operationalities, and logics that are required to actually think through the upgrading process. And this is in terms of land, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of facilities and community engagement. But it sought to simultaneously deal with issues of power and politics that play out at settlement scales, at city scales, and sometimes even in international and relational arenas. I think this is a really powerful contribution that the book makes, and each chapter does this in a different way. But the question of how we can be simultaneously radical and structural while also recognizing the need to be incremental, move slowly, and deal with complexity is something I think that the book offers a lot. So the concept, for example, of radical incrementalism or critical propositionality are both themes that I think are woven through the book and which you will see in the introduction and conclusion. I'd like to take the opportunity just for the authors in the audience to raise their hands. There's quite a few people here, and I'd like to just offer a round of applause for you guys. So if you authored or co-authored one of the chapters, if you could just raise your hand quickly. Thank you to everybody. Miriam? Is Miriam here? Are you going to do a thank you for the publisher? Okay. All right, I'm going to pass back to Miriam now. Thank you also to my ACC colleagues who have come through and have been very supportive in this whole process.
Well, Liza, you just gave it away, right? I just have to say thank you to the publisher.
I had to make sure I couldn't sit down and then...
But Sandy, before I get to you, I just want to say again thank you to the authors for going on this journey with us. Thank you to ACC, because I think it was a very robust engagement. We've learned a lot from each other. We've learned to respect one another's differences and also one another's key assets and contributions to this process. So I think that's been really valuable. I want to obviously thank Sandy and UCT Press for leaping to the occasion to put out this book and work with us. Thank you for the professionalism around the process and for guiding us also through the review process and everything you've done. I'd like to thank Karen Press. I don't think she's here, but she's been quite instrumental at some point in the text editing. I want to thank Another Love Productions, who have provided the cover to the book. From Isandla Institute side, I also just need to acknowledge the Ford Foundation, because they were the funder at the time who made it possible for us to start this process and this project. And last but not least, to the fellow co-conspirators, Tristan, Scott, Warren, and Liza. Thank you.